I want to thank the museum for the privilege giving me to come over here and participate in this program. Before I do, I want to introduce the wife sitting here, and two grandsons, and my granddaughter, my daughter sitting behind me, my granddaughter over here, and a family friend here. They all support me very, very much since I'm 81 years old and never have to do
91.
anything.
91, Bob. 91.
So without them, I wouldn't be here, to be honest with you. But I'm supposed to talk about D-Day, but I'd like to start with building up, getting to D-Day. How many of you in here know, he spoke of the sergeant pilots, but the Air Force, or the Air Corps then, had a sergeant pilot program back in the late 41s and 42. They also had a program for sergeant pilots before World War II. And the commanding officer of the 316th Troop Carrier Group, which is what I participated in combat, was a pre-World War II sergeant pilot. And he had worked up to a colonel. And I was privileged to meet two of those people. Both of them were colonels. But when the 316th Troop Carrier Group that I joined went overseas, they departed Bergstrom Air Force, Army Airfield it was then, in Austin, Texas, and 70% of their pilots were staff sergeants. And they were captains on the airplane. And they all, when I joined the 316th, it had been over 2 years, and all of them had become the mission officers, more flight officers. So when I got there, I walked into an experienced outfit that's just beyond belief. But to get to World War II, D-Day, I enlisted in the Army in June 1940, 18 years old. And I think that was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. It got me to where I am today. I made 3 such decisions, but we'll cover those when we get to them. I wanted to go to the Air Corps, and my mother asked me not to go overseas. Well, back then, they didn't have training centers like they do today. When you enlisted in the military, you were assigned to an organization, and they put you through the training that you're supposed to have. The only training I could get in the Air Corps was in Panama, overseas. So I elected, if I can't fly, I'll shoot them down. So I joined an anti-aircraft regiment. And I was in that for a couple of years. In 1941, you could say a little bit successful, I was sent to Fort Monroe, Virginia, to work with the National Defense Research Committee as a photographer, as a special type of captain. And I was there when Pearl Harbor hit and we canceled. And I spent the next year in a service that I doubt if any of you have ever heard of it, the United States Army Mine Planning Service. Any hands up? What we were doing was putting submarine mines, anti-submarine mines in American harbors across the ship channels. My ship got Hampton Roads, which are entrance to Norfolk, Portsmouth, and Newport News, Virginia. We got between the Capes, and we were in the Delaware River, and when I got my appointment to go flying, we were in Portland, Maine. Now going flying is the best part of it, I think. We, 3 of us, went over one morning and learned that the airborne was looking for people. So 3 of us went to join the paratroopers. We walked into this office, and there's one desk, he'd hollered flying airplanes, and the other paratroopers. And there was another decision that I made that was life-changing. I went to the pilot end of it, the other 2 went to the paratrooper end of it. Then I had a problem. I was born and reared on a farm in the western part of the state of Virginia, up the rivers and so forth. And in order to get the pilot training, I had to deliver a birth certificate. Well, back when I was born, maternity was always done in the home with a
midwife.
what do you call them?
Midwife.
A midwife.
Midwife. And there was no records made of my birth. They would not take a school record. So I was delayed going into training for about 3 months to produce the fact that I was born. And finally did that through the United States Census Bureau Special Search. And in January of 1943, started through pilot training and graduated in November 1943. And I thought I was going to P-38, but I wound up going, they stopped me at the gate and turned me around, and I got orders to go to Bergstrom Army Airfield at Del Valley, Texas. How many know where Del Valley is?
Yeah.
Well, trying to get there in 1943 by train. And that was about the only way to travel. And you couldn't find it. They didn't know it because there's no trains running to Del Valley. So finally, I got a bus out of Houston to go to Del Valley, which is about 3 or 4 miles east of Austin. And I was there for about 3 weeks. Then we went to Grenada, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, Missouri, C-47 training, Goonie Birds. And in March of 44 rather, I started overseas with a flight of 3 C-47s. We went to West Palm Beach, Puerto Rico, British Columbia, 2 stops in Brazil, Ascension Island, 3 stops in Africa, then to England. And here I am with 200 hours in C-47s, doing all of this stuff on my own, 21 years old. And you've heard of hot pilots. Well, I was more than a hot pilot. I was just kind of a walking sheet of blue flame. And I landed in England and went to Cottesmore, which is a regular old RAF base, all the permanent buildings and everything. And then I joined the 316th Troop Carrier Group, 44th Troop Carrier Squadron. And got to talking to the commanding officer of the squadron that had me in to talk to me. He got to tell me a little bit about what the 316th had done. They had gone overseas with a bunch of staff sergeant pilots, wound up in Cairo, Egypt, and chased Rommel back across North Africa. They participated in Sicily, they participated in Salerno, and they were all over. They moved to England about 2 weeks before I got there. Well, let me tell you, that blue flame was something like the light of a candle then, because I had never realized what I was getting into. They were flying at night, formation flying. And if you get up there at night, you can't see anything hardly, and you're flying about 25 or 30 feet from the wingtip of the man to your right or left. And it was kind of scary. We lost 2 airplanes midair in training. We lost another 2 airplanes in taxiing on the ground. It was so dark because we turned any of the lights on. But then we started. The D-Day come up on the 4th of June, 1944. We had our first briefing. And the thing that stays with me more than anything else in that briefing, we were going to send the squadron, or group rather, was going to send 72 airplanes in this mass of somewhere around 800 airplanes. And they expected 50% of us not to come back. And here you are thinking about that. But I want to stop right here and make a comment. There wasn't a man in that group, pilots and mechanics, radio operators, navigators, whatever, that wasn't a volunteer. Every person that went aboard that airplane to fly combat was a volunteer. Nobody recruited them to do that. You did it on your own. All the B-17s and the B-24s and the fighter pilots and so forth were volunteers. And this is something that I was real proud to be in the force, that if you wanted to be there, you could be. If you didn't want to, you didn't have to. But we started out training in pulling gliders at night. And it was scary at times. And finally you get a little confidence. And you realize that these people that you're joining up with do what they were doing. And the 316th Troop Carrier Group was one of 6 groups that was in the 52nd Wing. And each group in that wing put up 72 airplanes for D-Day. And we were north of London about 100 miles. There was 2 wings south of us, just west of London, and they were putting up the same number of airplanes that we were. Now, if you're going to think about it, here you're pushing 1,000, 1,100 airplanes, flying at night, all that ammunition, we had belly racks under the airplanes that you could attach these bundles to that were packed in ammunition, whatever was there. It went 4 under each airplane, 28 paratroopers at each airplane. So the 52nd wing had, well, you take, multiply 72 airplanes, 1 squad, 1 group, by 28, and do that 6 more times. So we were carrying quite a few paratroopers, and every airplane we had was overloaded. And we started out, and down south, there was 2 wings, and they were flying the same number of airplanes that we were flying. And all of these airplanes had to get in a track line because they wanted the 101st Airborne was south of us. And they wanted the 101st and the 82nd to be over the drop zone in France at the same time. And how do you do that? At night, you got these groups. So what did we do? We had to fly time distance to a particular point, and if they may or may not have a navigational radio there, but we'd make a change in the course and do this again. And we were far enough apart. In other words, one group, one way group would go by the 82nd, the next one would drop in behind them, and so that when they got to France, the 82nd and the 101st would literally be there at the same time. And everything worked for us real fine as far as getting there, but then when we got to the peninsula, we ran into some clouds. And here at night, flying at night in weather, so we pulled up, got on top of the cloud, and then found our Pathfinders group. Now I want to stop a little bit about Pathfinders. 52nd Wing had 15 Pathfinder airplanes. Now what's a Pathfinder? This is a C-47. They'll put a group of men on it, usually about 15, 16 soldiers, that have small radios, have panels, they call them, they would make a T. And the material that they was using, they called it halophane. It was a reflective material. They'd make a T on the ground out of that. And we was using a navigational device, short-range navigational device for the first time called Eureka Rebecca. And the lead airplanes had that. And this would take us up to the drop zone. Now, I know you've read and heard on the TVs and so forth about how scattered the airborne was when they got on the ground. And this is a fact, they were. But I dare say that very few of them missed their Pathfinder route because they were just there. But the Pathfinder's wrong, the drop was wrong. And that was the only way I can explain it. The Pathfinders was in weather just like we were. They were being fired at just like we were. And if they missed the drop zone by a mile or 2, that was it. That was the problem. Now, General Gavin, who was the commander of the 82nd Division, stated that he was 2 miles from where it was supposed to be. And he dropped out of the lead airplane in my group. So we were 2 miles off, but we hit the drop zone because when we passed over, we had the Eureka Rebecca, but when we passed over the drop zone, I stood up in the cockpit. I was flying co-pilot. And I stood up in the cockpit and looked over the nose, and the halophane T went underneath the nose of our airplane. So I know we were where the Pathfinders told us to be. So you can't blame the troop carrier for that. But anyway, you can't even blame the paratroopers. You got 1,000 GIs on the ground shooting at you with tracers, and you're just lucky to be where you are. Anyway, we come in and we made a drop, and then we dropped down to the treetops and went over Utah Beach and back home on a track. Well, we had flown about 30 minutes, and we were paralleling the inbound track. We were about 3 miles east of them, and you could see the airplanes reflected against the water. The train was still going. It took maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours for them to pass by. And my squadron, my group, come home without any losses. We had several bullet holes through the airplanes, but there was no losses. Then D-Day, I want to read a deal that General Eisenhower sent each of us a message. It says, sailors, soldiers, and airmen of the United States Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward where we have given these, we have striven at many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. You talk, your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well armed and well equipped and battle hardened. He will fight savagely. I have full confidence in your courage, deep devotion to duty, and skill of battle. We all accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck. Let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and vital, notable understanding. A copy of that letter was handed to every aircrew member participating in the invasion of D-Day. And I suppose that it was kind of encouraging. I didn't get to read it until after the flight was over with because it was dark. It was handed to me. I went aboard the airplane, sat down in the seat, put it in a pocket up here in the flight suit, and I got to read it after I got home. Well, anyway, D-Day +1. We went back. Again, we were briefed, the same kind of a briefing, what it was going to be a daylight drive. And we were going in over Omaha Beach, and we were going to make a 180-degree turn and come out over Utah Beach. And it was about half the number in the 316 that was making that trip. And the weather wasn't the best of it, and we took off and started out, and we hit weather before we got out of England. And we had a spread formation that if you could think about 300 or 400 airplanes flying in groups of V of Vs. Now what's a V of Vs? You got 3 airplanes. That's the lead. Then just to their right, about 50 or 75 feet, maybe 50 yards, you got another 3 airplanes in a V. And on the left, you've got the same thing. Then behind them, you've got 4 V of Vs. We run into weather. Well, we had a position there that the radio silence, you couldn't talk to anybody, nobody could talk to you, except the commander would give the flight commander would give one notice, one kind of a 2-word notice, spread out. And everybody would spread out, get into formation, and even the flights would spread out. And you'd have a front of about 20 miles. And when we got out of the weather here, we had to come back together. Well, we couldn't find the group. And we wound up hooking up with another group and going in. On the airplane that we were on, we brought it home, no problems, but we had 260-some holes in the wings and tail of the airplane. So D-Day was quite an experience. We did land after the beaches on D-Day +6, I think it was, or 7, behind Utah Beach, taking cold blood and hospital supplies in, and taking litter patients out. And then we spent the rest of the time between missions hauling stuff over France. And I want to give you an idea of one mission, of 1 month's missions, then I'll sit down. The month of October, this is between just about 3 months after D-Day. The 316th logged 6,500 hours of flying time. The crews flew 818 sorties, carried 33,000 pounds of mail, 2,184,460 pounds of ammunition, 1,604 pounds of gasoline, 669,247 pounds of combat equipment, and while returning 276 liver patients, 289 walking patients to various hospitals in London, England, and Scotland. And after that, we continued to do just that. And I think that'll tell you a little bit about D-Day. And I appreciate again your attention, and thank you very much.